Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel, The Medieval Reader. So today I'm doing a tag, the Nonfiction on Booktube tag, which was created by Olive, who is one of the hosts of Nonfiction November. Now, for me, every single month is a month in which I read nonfiction. I do hope to read some different types of nonfiction this month, and I will get to that in a minute. But I wanted to introduce myself to people who have never come across my channel before and say that I am a nonfiction booktuber. I do read fiction as well, and I'm really interested in history, philosophy, theology, literary studies from a historical perspective. So that's me. And so yeah, let's do this tag. The first question, how much nonfiction do you read? So I read a lot of nonfiction, but you wouldn't be able to tell that from Goodreads because I don't necessarily read nonfiction books from cover to cover. So in 2019, so this year, I have so far read 53 books and 38%, that is 20 books, have been nonfiction. One of the 20 is actually a graphic novel, but it's a graphic novel about a woman living during the Holocaust who provided aid to Jews living in the ghettos. That's nonfiction. Nonfiction doesn't necessarily have to be in book form. 2, what kind of nonfiction videos do you make? So I do tend to make a lot of videos about history, particularly medieval Renaissance history. Even though my channel is called The Medieval Reader, I do predominantly work on the 16th century, which is considered the Renaissance. When I started this channel, I thought I would be more of a medievalist, but as it turns out, I mostly work on the Renaissance. If you do not know, I am a PhD student in French literature who works on rhetoric in the 16th century in the form of life stories, so basically brief biographies of contemporary figures, many of whom were executed for their faith, so martyrs. I'm really interested in martyrologies, which are collections of lives of martyrs, and particularly the last minutes of their life. So it's nonfiction, but it's also somewhat fictional. I mean, it's legendary. It serves a larger purpose of bringing together a community. I think if anything, I want people to know that fiction is not necessarily incompatible with nonfiction. For example, the martyrologies I mentioned, hagiography, saints' lives. I'm very fascinated with the boundaries that we insist upon between fact and fiction and how these boundaries are actually much more fluid than historians might pretend. 3, what's your favorite subgenre of nonfiction? My favorite subgenre of nonfiction is new historiography. I mentioned new historiography when I made my most recent video on Carlo Ginzburg's book, The Cheese and the Worms. I will link that below. But new historiography looks at the lives of one or just a few individuals, maybe a small community, and in studying that person's life, we come to learn more about social movements at that time, the interests of, say, peasants, women, and particularly people whose lives have not been told historically. My interest in new historiography began with the lives of Francis of Assisi, which are, of course, based in reality. There was a man named Francis of Assisi who founded the Order of the Friars Minor, but of course his story was told in many different ways. There are legends that were told about him, and studying these legends can tell us a lot about the values that the hagiographer, that is, the person writing these saints' lives, valued. 4, do you have a favorite nonfiction book? My favorite nonfiction book is Works of Love by Søren Kierkegaard, who was a Danish philosopher. It is a spiritual work. I particularly love the first half of the book, and it deals with love and unconditional love. Really love that book. The one that I would recommend to people who really love literature and want to understand how narrative has influenced one of the most famous spiritual texts in the world, the Bible, I would recommend The Art of Biblical Narrative by Robert Alter. I have definitely mentioned this book many times, but what I love about Alter's book is that it takes a literary approach to the Bible, which as a literature student is long overdue. There have been so many studies of the Bible that look at the historical aspects of it, but don't consider its narrative. It particularly focuses on the Hebrew scriptures and Genesis in particular. 5, what do you think keep people from wanting to read more nonfiction? I think there's this assumption that nonfiction necessarily excludes an engaging narrative. And I hope that watching this video will inspire you to challenge this idea that nonfiction is supposed to be boring. I would say that maybe biographies might be right for you, because a biography, a well-written biography, tells a good story. It doesn't have to be academic nonfiction, which I must admit I read a lot of, so I'm not always the best person to turn to for recommendations about engaging, entertaining nonfiction, but I'm trying to promote some of that on my channel. The other thing is that people don't necessarily read what they're interested in. I think that the nonfiction they read is in school, and so they're told to read certain things. But I think that you should just ask yourself, what are you interested in? Are you interested in particular sports? Are you interested in, I don't know, just different activities? Interested in particular questions? I would say that you should just Google listicles. So lists of popular books on a particular topic that people have recommended. And those are great places to begin, because at least people have recommended them and they're probably reasonably priced. 6, why do you like nonfiction? I love nonfiction because I learn about human behavior, particularly the study of life stories. It tells me a lot about human behavior, what different communities value. And I feel very attached to the characters because I know that they were real people. I often find that I feel more attached to the characters in nonfiction than I do with fictional characters, because I just know that they're real. So when I read their letters, it's like there's these real people who wrote these letters, and I feel like I know them in a way. 7, what's a nonfiction book you read because of BookTube? I read H is for Hawk by Helen MacDonald. It was mostly Olive who recommended the book and convinced me that I should read H is for Hawk. I did enjoy it. I particularly liked the sections about falconry and her raising this goshawk, training it, all of that. I liked those parts the best. I did feel at times that she wasn't in the best headspace when she wrote this book. I did watch a documentary about her in the years following the publication of H is for Hawk, and she's definitely in a better place. She's less petty. She's just, I guess, a nicer person. She's honest in H is for Hawk that, you know, her depression caused her to behave in ways that weren't always the best. But the writing is beautiful, and I am very glad I read it. It was super interesting to learn about falconry. And now I do actually want to read T.H. White's book, The Goshawk. 8, what's the best nonfiction book you've read lately? The Printing Revolution in Early Modern Europe by Elizabeth Eisenstein. I made an entire video about it. I will link it below. I would recommend it because it is engaging. It talks about the influence of printing at the time in the late 15th century and in the 16th century. That was new technology. That's like our Twitter. And it's just revolutionized so many different disciplines. It does have images in it. It is academic, but it's also very accessible. 9, what are some of your nonfiction reading goals? I would really like to learn more about other periods and other parts of the world. I am very aware that I study only one part of one society in a particular time period. I feel like I really need to branch out and read about different histories, about different people. That's something that I would like to address a little bit this month. 10, what's your advice for incorporating more nonfiction into your reading diet? Many of you who say that you're not nonfiction readers, you probably don't realize that you actually do read nonfiction. You don't necessarily read nonfiction books from cover to cover, but if you're reading blogs, if you're reading Twitter threads, if you are reading any kinds of factual writing or fact-based writing, you're reading nonfiction. And I think what you need to do is ask yourself, what kind of nonfiction reading are you doing already? And then maybe explore it further. That's probably where you should begin. Instead of thinking of yourself as someone who really hates nonfiction, you probably don't. You're probably already reading some nonfiction. So begin there. And then, like I said, go on Goodreads, find these listicles, and see what kind of books are recommended for you to dive a little bit deeper. But also, it's entertaining, it has a good narrative, it's not dry and boring. Maybe read graphic novels. So there are nonfiction graphic novels, so you can, check those out. Maybe try memoirs. Maybe try H is for Hawk. And recommendations. So I wanted to recommend channels that, for the most part, I have not recommended before. These are all fantastic booktubers who read quite a bit of nonfiction. The first one is Justin at Ghost Reader. You probably do know about his channel, but if you don't, you should definitely check his channel out. He had this whole series of videos on World War I, and I would definitely recommend revisiting those videos and just, following his hauls. He does read fiction as well as nonfiction. Triumphal Reads, who does tend to read a lot of nonfiction, a lot of medieval and classical histories particularly. He does read a lot of history. So if you're looking for booktubers who read history, then Triumphal Reads is a channel you definitely want to check out. Reading classics. So if you like my style of kind of making a series of videos about one book, then I would definitely recommend reading classics. Now, the woman who runs the channel, she's actually a classicist, so she reads Latin and Greek. So definitely check out her channel. There's Rachel Ray. Very recently, I've kind of discovered her channel, and she recommended a book on Uber that I really want to read maybe this month, but she reads a lot of biography and autobiography. Peg at the History Shelf, whom I think is the most recent nonfiction booktuber I have discovered. And finally, Alexis at Real Human Being. She hasn't posted in a few months, but she does read a lot of nonfiction, and would definitely recommend her channel as well. So let me know what kind of nonfiction you like, or whether you're having some challenges getting into nonfiction and why, and maybe I'll be able to help you or direct you to some booktubers who will be able to help you, websites that might be able to give you ideas. And thank you everybody for watching, and I will talk to you later. Bye now.